Welcome to GouldFish on Games, where today I'm going to need all of you to join in, because only with your powers combined can we review Captain Planet. This is the Amiga version, despite what that label might say, and was released in 1991 and made by Mindscape Interactive. My original copy of the game came in a much smaller box, similar to this, as it was bundled with the Amiga 500 Plus Cartoon Classics pack. Inside the box we get the game on a single floppy disk, as well as a manual that shows off its credentials by stating it's made from recycled paper. And after going over the typical things you expect in a manual, like how to start the game, as well as how all the various characters control, there's actually a section at the back that gives you various hints and tips how you can save the planet, including such treasures as: don't buy anything made of ivory, tortoiseshell, coral, reptile skins or furs, as these usually have come from endangered species. Use daylight, it's free and it doesn't pollute. Now I normally wouldn't go into too much detail on the developers, but I have a few that I want to point out. As was typical for the time, the game was made by just a few people, with Anthony Carruthers being the main programmer, artist, level designer, as well as the musician. He was mostly known for his 8-bit games, but he did work on the very impressive Captive series for the 16-bits. One of the artists is Jason Kingsley, who would go on to form Rebellion Games, and is the current owner of the comic 2000 AD. And finally, down as one of the level designers we have Phil Harrison, the Sony, Microsoft and now Google manager, which is really quite an impressive range of devs on a licensed game like this. The game itself opens up with this amazing bit of music. Even if the title screen is a little boring, there really isn't much in the way of menus, graphics, it's all very bare boned. So you'll want to hit the fire button that will take you to the level select screen with a little fanfare, where you'll initially get to pick between Wheeler and his fire ring, or G and a water ring. There are 6 levels and you get limited control over the order that you play them in. Now fire is the easiest of the levels, and after selecting it you get informed of the controls, as well as given a basic outline of the goals. Each level has its own unique tasks, and learning how to complete them is the real challenge of this game. So continuing with fire, this level is split into 2 main parts. First up, we have to destroy all the radioactive looking blocks, which don't glow or anything, they just have that symbol, and that's easily done using the fire ring. But you need to be careful, as there's a bunch of very random looking monsters in the levels. I don't remember any of these from the cartoons, and as you can imagine they can be quite deadly, and are one of your main causes of death. But others also include touching water, or falling from great heights. Thankfully, most of the Planeteers have a fall guard that you can trigger, with Wheelers being a balloon that will take you back to where you fell. These aren't get out of jail free cards, as we'll see in a little bit. Now if it wasn't for that big picture of Wheeler at the bottom of the screen, you'd be pretty hard pressed to tell that this is a Captain Planet game. Or at least initially. The music, while very catchy, has nothing in common with the series, neither does any of the bad guys. You really don't find much recognisable until you clear all the blocks and then walk across the clouds to find the Geo Cruiser, at which point you can then take to the skies. Your goal is now to take out all these balloons that are above the ozone layer, as they are dropping deadly CFCs that are making holes in it. Thankfully you can patch up those holes with this ball that falls from this very handy pipe, which just so happens to have an absolutely massive Sly Sludge stood on top of it. With that complete, you then want to get the polar bears to walk across the clouds and then across the fixed up ozone layer to make it to the North Pole. It's all a little odd, but at least it's quite inventive. Next up is Water and G, who amazingly doesn't really project water, instead it's ice. Though thankfully it's not that typical gaming ice that's all slippery and sends you flying, so instead you end up using these as platforms to get around the level. But it will also freeze the bad guys, who you'll then need to touch to pop, and when that happens, they are finally taken care of. But be careful, as if you don't do that, they will thaw out and then get very angry and rush at you. Your full guard is to create a slide, which is very cool, but it can result in you hitting a wall and dying, so you have to be very careful with how you use it. The goal of this level is to purify the water and then get the dolphins to said water, but this is much easier said than done, as you have to climb multiple towers to drop these blocks, but only these blocks. If you hit the spike, then you might as well give up as you failed. The reason for this is you need to provide pools of water for the dolphins to jump around in, and if the pool is cracked then it won't fill up. Though you can still let the dolphins go free, who will promptly jump out and die. Which unsurprisingly is another failure point. And just to drive the point home, the ring in the border will also break. Cleaning up the pool is a bit of a pain, as you have to use the sub to grab these pulsating barrels and then drop them on this conveyor belt to hell. All while avoiding lasers and torpedoes, as well as the scenery that will very quickly take you out if you're not being careful. For the second level of the game, it's really quite punishing, and just working out the steps required to finish it took quite a long time. Thankfully though, if you do fail, you don't really have all that much you need to replay to get back to this point. Heart and Mate would typically be the next level that you would play, and after water it's a little less complex, but it's still just as hard. Your goal is to take out multiple incinerators that are creating some very deadly clouds, and then go on to save some elephants. The trick to this level is that it's a complex maze in which you'll have to use your heart power to make trees and vines regrow, which I have to say I don't remember that from any of the episodes I saw. These then allow you to climb or walk across them so you can reach new parts of the level, so you better make sure you made them fully grow before moving on. Firing the heart downwards is your full guard, which, well, it looks a little odd, to be honest. The critters in this level are also a bit more of a pain than normal, as not only will they still kill you, but they can also shrink vines if they're dropped on top of them by an evil bird. So taking them all out is essential, as the order that you raise the vines is very important, as many can only be raised from very specific places, and if they reduce the wrong one then you might have to backtrack to raise it again before you can move on. In theory, the saving of the elephants should be the easy bit, but you have to be very careful as that geocopter isn't the easiest machine to control, and the elephants are very delicate to touching the environment. So if you're very careful and avoid all the lasers, the trees, Hoggish Greedly and Rigger, you can finally drop them off and finish the level. Now you might have noticed that when you take out a baddie, you get this tiny version that follows you. These then act as a multiplier on any score that you get, which might not seem all that important, but every time you get 5,000 points you get an extra life, and that is the only way you get more lives in this game. You can lose these tails in one of two ways, either by dying, or by activating your full guard if you have one. One other thing that I've not mentioned is the controls. Now, for the most part they work well enough, but it does take a little to get used to the way they move and jump, as the jump is quite big and floaty, but once you've started it you have no in-air control over them at all. Though the next Planeteer is all about in-air control, as it's Linker with the Ring of Wind, which grants her the ability to fly, using, well, I guess the wind from down under it seems? This ability allows you to travel up, but if you need to go back down you have to turn it off, which is done by firing your main attack. You just have to be careful to re-enable it before you hit the ground, and you have to actually be falling for it to activate. It's a little fiddly in trying to get it to work. The goals are actually a little different this time around, as you have to take out bombs on both land and water, and while you're doing that you also have to take out all the rubbish in the level as well. There are no animals to rescue this time, but you still have to control the sub, as you use that to take out the water bombs, and it's a real pain, as this vehicle isn't the easiest thing you've ever had to control, as moving the sub around with the water currents and small passages isn't easy, and it's not always predictable when those currents will actually affect the sub. It does feel a little random, but the currents are actually quite useful for pushing the rocks around and moving them through smaller gaps, which is actually quite a nice idea, and later on you have to quickly drop them, pick them up and drop them again to try and avoid some of the gaps. The most annoying part of this level is actually taking out the bad guys, which you need to either push off ledges or hit them multiple times, which is quite different to all the other characters. And now we come on to the last of the Planeteers, Kwame, with his Earth Ring. And as with all the other levels, this has its own unique touch. The ring produces boulders, and these have a limited set of physics, and react a little like Boulder Dash, in that they'll flow over each other and then down holes. So you can use this to form new walkways, as well as take out the main target of the level, these cans of goo. Unfortunately, Kwame is the only hero not to have a full guard, so you have to make sure you have a solid floor underneath you, as if you die any boulders that you place will be removed. And once those cans are taken care of, it's back into the geocopter as you have animals to rescue once again. And this time it's the pit ponies, which really do not look like any animal I've ever seen, at least when they're front on to you. Once again, those fiddly controls of the copter makes this harder than it really needs to be. Though thankfully this is the last time you'll need to use a vehicle, because with all those heroes' powers combined, it's time to bring on Captain Planet, who is the final level of the game. Thankfully he has the power to fly, and he can also store 2 ring powers at the same time. Though these powers have been changed slightly. Water now produces this wave rather than the ice, and Heart is now the main attack ability. Who would have thought that? You will need to be constantly switching between the various powers using these green rings, as this forms the main puzzle element of the level, as you can use water to put out fire, fire to break posts, earth to take out obstacles below you, or wind to blow away objects as well as create paths. Work out all the puzzles and you'll finally meet up with the one and only
Duke Nukem.
Wait, wrong Duke Nukem. This guy is the only real villain from the TV show that you get to directly attack and affect. The rest of them, as we've seen, do show up, but they don't react to any of your attacks and just seem to be huge in scale next to the player sprites. Now I wouldn't say this is a good game. It's inventive, it's quite varied from level to level, but as a whole it's a little annoying with more than a few control issues. Unsurprisingly for an Amiga and a licensed game, it's not up on any of the gaming services, and I don't see it arriving anytime soon. So second hand is your best option for getting a copy. though the big box edition is much harder to find, as you'll typically find those smaller boxes that came with the Amiga 500 Plus and the 600. This was one of the first games I played on the Amiga, and as such I do tend to come back to it time and time again, because that music is just burned into my soul, so I might be a little bit biased when it comes to discussing it. So I am interested to hear what your thoughts are on the game. And until next time, I was the GouldFish, that was Saving the Planet 90s style, and this was GouldFish on Games. We're the Planeteers, and you can be one too, as saving our planet is the thing to do. Looting and polluting is not the way, hear what Captain Planet has to say. The power is yours to like, comment or subscribe.